Alan Parker was the kind of man who had dedicated his entire life to protecting others. A veteran police officer in the K-9 unit, he was known for his sharp instincts and unwavering commitment to justice. Yet, beneath his stoic exterior, Alan was a man of quiet warmth, deeply devoted to his family. His wife, Helen, was his anchor, a compassionate teacher whose gentle nature balanced Alan's hardened edges. Their 13-year-old daughter, Jane, was the light of their lives. Intelligent, curious, and full of life, Jane was the kind of child who brought laughter to even the most mundane days. Together they were a close-knit family, deeply connected by love and shared moments of joy. Then there was Zeus, Alan's loyal K-9 partner and an integral part of their family. A German shepherd with striking intelligence and an unbreakable bond with Alan, Zeus wasn't just a work partner. He was a trusted companion who seemed to understand the Parker family's rhythms. Whether it was running through training drills with Alan or curling up at Jane's feet during family movie nights, Zeus had earned his place as more than just a police dog. He was family. One sunny morning, the Parker family's home was filled with the usual hustle and bustle. The smell of Helen's freshly baked pancakes wafted through the air as Jane chattered excitedly about her upcoming school project. She had chosen to write about heroes, inspired by her father and Zeus. "Dad!" she exclaimed, her brown eyes wide with admiration. "You and Zeus are real-life superheroes. Everyone at school thinks so." Alan chuckled, tousling her hair. "Well, it's a team effort," he said, casting a knowing glance at Zeus, who was sprawled on the floor, ears twitching as if he understood every word. Helen smiled at the scene, her heart full. She often referred to her family as Team Parker, a phrase that had become a motto in their household. "We're going to need all our superhero energy for this weekend's picnic," she said, pouring syrup onto Jane's plate. It was a rare weekend off for Alan, and they had planned to spend it outdoors, hiking and enjoying the fresh air. It was moments like these, simple, unassuming moments, that Helen cherished the most. She always believed that the strength of their family lay in their ability to find joy in the everyday. As the family enjoyed breakfast, Alan's phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from an unknown number. The text read, "Cherish these moments with your family. Life is more fragile than you think." Alan frowned, a wave of unease washing over him. Who would send such a message? Was it a prank or something more sinister? His instincts as a police officer told him to take it seriously, but he didn't want to alarm Helen or Jane. He quickly deleted the message, forcing a smile as he returned to the table. That day, Alan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. While Zeus remained calm and watchful, Alan's thoughts were clouded by the cryptic message. Despite the nagging sense of unease, he decided not to dwell on it. Instead, he focused on the laughter of his daughter and the warmth of his wife, savoring the happiness of the moment. Deep down, Alan knew that as a police officer, danger was always lurking just around the corner. But at that moment, he allowed himself to believe that their family's love was strong enough to withstand anything. Zeus seemed to sense Alan's unease, occasionally nudging his hand or sitting closer than usual. Alan found comfort in the dog's presence, knowing that Zeus had been by his side through countless dangerous situations. As the day progressed, Alan's mind returned to the family picnic they had planned. He promised himself to make it a day they would all remember, a day where nothing could disturb their peace. Yet, as the sun set that evening, painting the sky with hues of gold and orange, Alan couldn't shake the feeling that this serenity wouldn't last. His life as an officer had taught him that peace was often the prelude to chaos, and he silently prayed that this time he was wrong. The next morning dawned with a brilliance that seemed to mirror the joy and warmth of the Parker household. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow on the kitchen where Helen was humming softly as she brewed coffee. Jane was already at the table, her notebook open as she sketched ideas for her school project on heroes. Zeus lay sprawled nearby, his head resting on his paws, ever watchful yet relaxed. Alan, still reflecting on the unsettling message he had received the day before, decided not to mention it. He didn't want to dampen the lightness of the morning, especially when their long-awaited family picnic was just hours away. "All right, Team Parker," Alan called, his deep voice carrying through the house as he walked into the kitchen. "Let's get moving. The lake isn't going to enjoy itself." Jane beamed at him, clutching her sketchbook as she ran to grab her backpack. Helen chuckled, shaking her head. "You're worse than Jane when it comes to excitement, Alan," she teased, handing him a thermos of coffee. "Zeus, you ready for an adventure?" she added, turning to the German shepherd. At the sound of his name, Zeus sprang to his feet, tail wagging. The dog's enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, Alan allowed himself to forget the nagging unease that had lingered since the cryptic text. As the family piled into their car, the air was filled with laughter and anticipation. Helen was meticulously checking their picnic basket, making sure nothing was forgotten, while Jane was eagerly telling Zeus about all the fun they would have by the lake. Alan smiled, watching his daughter's animated expressions in the rearview mirror. It was these moments, simple, joyful, and unguarded, that he cherished most. They were a reminder of why he did what he did, why he faced danger every day, to protect families like his own, to preserve moments like these. The drive was peaceful, the scenic route lined with trees whose autumn leaves blazed in shades of gold and crimson. Helen had her hand resting lightly on Alan's arm, and Jane's laughter echoed in the car as she playfully tried to get Zeus to shake her hand from his seat. Alan felt a fleeting sense of contentment, a momentary reprieve from the weight of his responsibilities. But just as the car approached a busy intersection, everything changed in an instant. A flash of red barreled into their peripheral vision, a truck speeding through a red light. Alan's instincts kicked in as he slammed the brakes, but it was too late. The impact was deafening, the screech of metal against metal drowning out every other sound. Time seemed to stretch and warp, the world reduced to chaos and shattering glass. Zeus barked sharply, his body pressing protectively against Jane as the car spun violently before coming to a jarring halt. When the dust settled, the world was eerily quiet. Alan's ears rang as he struggled to process what had just happened. His hands trembled as he reached for Helen, but she was unnervingly still, her head resting against the shattered window. A cold dread gripped him as he turned to Jane, whose small frame was slumped against her seat, her face pale and bloodied. Zeus whined softly, nudging Jane's arm with his nose, his normally sharp, alert eyes filled with a rare desperation. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their voices brisk and urgent as they worked to stabilize the scene. Alan fought against their attempts to move him, his mind refusing to accept what was unfolding. "Please," he choked out, his voice hoarse and raw. "My wife, my daughter, they need help." One paramedic gently guided him away from the wreckage, his words blurring together in the fog of Alan's shock. Helen was pronounced dead at the scene, her injuries too severe for even the swiftest intervention. Jane, miraculously, was still alive but unresponsive. Her fragile body rushed to the nearest hospital. Alan's world collapsed in that moment. The steady foundation of his life, the family he had built with such love and care, was shattered. Sitting in the back of the ambulance, Zeus at his side, Alan couldn't stop shaking. The guilt was suffocating, the what-ifs crashing over him like relentless waves. What if he had taken another route? What if he had been more vigilant? The weight of these thoughts threatened to break him entirely. At the hospital, Alan sat motionless beside Jane's bed, his calloused hand gripping her limp one. The soft beeping of the machines was both a comfort and a torment, a reminder that she was alive but fighting for her life. Zeus refused to leave her side, his watchful eyes fixed on her pale face as though willing her to wake up. The nurses, initially hesitant about allowing a dog in the room, soon softened as they saw Zeus's quiet devotion. He would nudge Jane's hand gently, his tail wagging faintly as if encouraging her to hold on. As the hours turned into days, the reality of Helen's absence began to settle over Alan like a suffocating fog. Her laughter, her touch, her warmth, gone. And yet, he couldn't allow himself to fully break. Jane needed him, and Zeus's unwavering presence reminded him that he wasn't entirely alone. In the quiet moments, Alan found himself replaying Helen's words. Team Parker can handle anything. He clung to those words like a lifeline, determined to find strength in the love they had shared. But even as he tried to focus on Jane's recovery, a darker thought gnawed at the edges of his mind, the cryptic message he had received the day before the accident. Life is more fragile than you think. Was it a coincidence? Or something more sinister? The question lingered, unresolved, as Alan sat in the sterile hospital room, watching over his daughter and mourning the life they had lost. Outside the window, the autumn leaves continued to fall, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding within. 3 weeks had passed since the accident, yet for Alan Parker, time seemed frozen in that one horrifying moment. Each day blurred into the next as he sat by Jane's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, her fragile body kept alive by machines. Zeus was his constant companion, never straying far from Jane's side. The German shepherd seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, his watchful eyes a silent reassurance that Alan wasn't alone. But even Zeus's loyal presence couldn't fully shield Alan from the crushing weight of grief and guilt. Helen was gone, Jane's future uncertain, and Alan found himself questioning everything he had once believed in. It was during one of these long, sleepless nights that the call came. A call that would pull Alan out of his despair and into the chaos of duty once more. His phone buzzed on the hospital bedside table, breaking the oppressive silence of the room. He hesitated, not wanting to leave Jane even for a moment, but when he saw Lieutenant Sarah Martinez's name on the screen, he answered. "Alan." Sarah's voice was calm but urgent, the kind of tone that only came with years of handling crises. "We've got a situation. Active shooter at Springfield Mall. Multiple casualties reported. We need you and Zeus." Alan's grip on the phone tightened as her words sank in. Springfield Mall. The place where Helen had loved to shop for Jane's birthday gifts. The place where he had once taken his family for countless carefree afternoons. Now it was the site of unimaginable terror. "I can't leave, Jane," he said, his voice cracking. "Not now." "I know this is asking a lot," Sarah replied, her tone softening. "But we need you, Alan. You're the best we've got, and Zeus, he's irreplaceable. Lives are at stake." Alan glanced at Jane, her pale face so heartbreakingly still. Zeus, as if sensing his hesitation, stood and pressed his head against Alan's leg, his dark eyes meeting his handler's with unwavering loyalty. It was as though the dog was reminding him of their shared purpose, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Taking a deep breath, Alan nodded, more to himself than anyone else. "All right," he said finally. "We'll be there." The drive to the mall was a blur of sirens and adrenaline, the weight of the mission pressing heavily on Alan's shoulders. Zeus sat in the back seat, his ears pricked and body tense, ready for whatever lay ahead. Alan couldn't help but think of Helen and Jane as the mall came into view, its parking lot swarming with panicked civilians and emergency vehicles. His heart clenched at the thought of families inside, caught in the crossfire, just as his own had been caught in the cruel randomness of fate. At the command center, Lieutenant Martinez was barking orders into multiple radios. When she saw Alan and Zeus approach, a flicker of relief crossed her face. "The suspect is Peter Hensley," she said, handing Alan a dossier. Former military, highly trained, emotionally unstable. He's already shot 3 people, 2 of whom didn't make it. He's holed up in the service corridors behind the food court. Alan scanned the file, his mind racing. Peter Hensley's life had spiraled out of control after his wife left him, taking their children with her. Today was supposed to be his youngest daughter's birthday. The detail hit Alan like a physical blow. 13, the same age as Jane. For a moment, the parallels between his own loss and Hensley's anguish threatened to overwhelm him. But then Zeus nudged his hand, grounding him in the present. There was no time for doubt. Armed and focused, Alan and Zeus entered the labyrinthine service corridors, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the concrete walls. Zeus moved ahead, his nose to the ground, tracking the scent of fear and gunpowder. Every step brought them closer to the suspect, and Alan's pulse thundered in his ears. He could hear distant cries from trapped civilians, their fear adding urgency to his every movement. Zeus froze suddenly, his body tense and ears forward. Alan knew the signal well. The suspect was close. "Peter Hensley," Alan called out, his voice firm but calm. "This is the police. Come out with your hands up." The response was immediate and violent. Gunfire erupted from behind a stack of crates, forcing Alan to take cover. Zeus remained steady, his training impeccable even in the face of chaos. "I'm not going back." Hensley's voice was raw with emotion, echoing through the corridor. "You don't understand. They took everything from me." Alan's heart ached at the desperation in the man's voice, a desperation he understood all too well. "Peter," he said, lowering his weapon slightly, "I do understand. 3 weeks ago, I lost my wife. My daughter is in a hospital bed fighting for her life. But this isn't the answer." Silence. Then a hesitant, broken response. "You're lying, just trying to trick me." Alan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo of Jane in her hospital bed, Zeus lying protectively beside her. "I'm sliding my phone over," he said. "Look at the picture. That's my daughter. That's Zeus. We're here because we don't want any other families to go through what we're going through." The phone skittered across the floor, landing near the crates. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of Peter's ragged breathing. Then, slowly, a gun clattered to the ground. "I never meant," Peter's voice broke. I couldn't handle it." Alan emerged cautiously, Zeus at his side, as Peter stepped out with his hands raised. The man's tear-streaked face was a mirror of grief, and in that moment, Alan saw not a monster, but a broken human being. Zeus held his position, a silent guardian as Alan secured Peter and called for backup. As the chaos subsided and the civilians were evacuated, Alan felt the weight of his grief lift just slightly. Zeus pressed against his leg, his steady presence a reminder of their shared purpose. Together they had saved lives that day, and in doing so, Alan felt a small glimmer of hope. Perhaps not all was lost. As the suspect Peter Hensley was taken into custody, Alan Parker allowed himself a moment to exhale. The tension in his chest loosened slightly, though the weight of what had just transpired still pressed heavily on his shoulders. The corridors of Springfield Mall, now littered with the aftermath of panic, discarded shoes, overturned crates, and the faint echoes of evacuees, felt eerily quiet compared to the chaos just moments earlier. Zeus, his ever-loyal partner, stood beside him, his chest rising and falling as he steadied his breathing after the intense encounter. His fur was damp with sweat, his eyes sharp and alert, but Alan could sense the weariness in him. Zeus had been the backbone of their mission once again, and Alan silently thanked whatever force had brought this incredible creature into his life. But the sense of relief was short-lived. A sudden burst of static crackled through Alan's earpiece. "All units, we've got a secondary threat," came the urgent voice of a SWAT officer. "Reports of an explosive device planted near the mall's utility room. Timer's active. 5 minutes and counting." Alan's heart dropped. His thoughts immediately turned to the civilians who had been evacuated and the officers still sweeping the building. A bomb. The word alone carried the weight of destruction and tragedy, and Alan knew the margin for error was razor-thin. He exchanged a quick glance with Zeus, who seemed to sense the shift in urgency. There was no hesitation in the dog's stance, no question of readiness. Zeus was prepared to follow Alan into whatever lay ahead. "Parker, can you get there in time?" Lieutenant Martinez's voice cut through the radio chatter, sharp and clear. "We're on it," Alan replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through his veins. He turned to Zeus, kneeling briefly to meet the dog's eyes. "All right, partner. It's time to save the day again." They moved quickly through the maze-like corridors, Zeus leading the way with his nose to the ground. Alan's mind raced as he followed his partner, each second ticking by with agonizing speed. The utility room wasn't far, but the labyrinth of service halls made the journey feel endless. The faint beeping of the bomb's timer grew louder as they approached, a grim reminder of the limited time they had to act. When they reached the room, the sight that greeted them was chilling. The device was crude but effective. Wires sprawled in every direction, connected to a timer counting down with ruthless precision. 3:42, 3:41, 3:40. Alan's training kicked in, his mind immediately assessing the situation. He radioed the bomb squad, but their ETA was still 3 minutes out, too late. This was on him now. "Zeus, sit," Alan commanded firmly, his voice unwavering despite the chaos. The dog obeyed instantly, sitting a few feet away but staying alert, his eyes locked on Alan as if to say, "We've got this." Alan crouched beside the device, his hands steady but his heart pounding. Years of experience told him this was no ordinary situation. Whoever had planted this bomb knew exactly how to make disarming it nearly impossible. His fingers worked swiftly, carefully tracing the wires, identifying the trigger mechanisms. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the timer ticked down mercilessly. 2:15, 2:14. A sudden noise, a metallic clatter from behind, made Alan freeze. He turned sharply to see Zeus spring to his feet, his ears pinned back, a low growl rumbling from his chest. "What is it, boy?" Alan whispered, his senses on high alert. Zeus's attention was fixed on a shadow in the corner of the room. Before Alan could react, a figure emerged. A man, armed and clearly unprepared for the presence of a police officer and a K9 unit. The man lunged, but Zeus was faster. With a ferocious bark, the German shepherd launched himself at the intruder, intercepting him mid-charge. Alan barely had time to process what was happening as Zeus wrestled the man to the ground, keeping him pinned with precise training and unrelenting strength. The man struggled, but Zeus held firm, his growls a warning that any further resistance would be met with consequences. Alan quickly secured the suspect, cuffing him before returning his attention to the bomb. "Good boy, Zeus," Alan muttered, though his focus was already back on the device. The timer now read 0:58, 0:57, 0:56. Time was slipping through his fingers like grains of sand, but Alan's hands moved with a calm determination. He thought of Jane, lying in her hospital bed, and Helen's voice in his memory. Team Parker can handle anything. He couldn't fail. Not today. At last, Alan identified the correct wire. With a deep breath, he steadied himself and carefully severed it. The timer froze at 0:12. A wave of relief washed over him, but there was no time to dwell on it. He turned to Zeus, who was still guarding the subdued suspect. "You're incredible, you know that?" he said, his voice filled with gratitude and admiration. Zeus's tail wagged faintly, his job well done. By the time the bomb squad arrived, the danger had passed. Alan handed the suspect over to the SWAT team, but his focus remained on Zeus, who had once again proven his courage and loyalty in the face of danger. As they walked out of the utility room, the sounds of the mall's chaos receding, Alan felt a deep sense of pride, not just in Zeus, but in their partnership. Together, they had faced impossible odds and come out on the other side. When Alan and Zeus returned to the hospital that night, they were met with the same sterile stillness that had greeted them for weeks. But something felt different. Jane's room, though quiet, seemed lighter somehow, as if the weight of the day had lifted some of the darkness that had settled over their lives. Zeus padded to Jane's bedside, resting his head gently on her hand, his loyalty unwavering. Alan sat beside them, his body exhausted, but his spirit renewed. "We did it, Jane," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Zeus saved the day again, just like he's saving us, one step at a time. He stroked Zeus's fur, his fingers trembling slightly as he let the events of the day sink in. The bond between man, dog, and family had never felt stronger, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, love and loyalty could light the way forward. The sterile monotony of hospital life had become Alan Parker's new normal. Days stretched into weeks, each one feeling as though it carried the weight of a lifetime. The rhythmic beeping of the machines tethered his daughter, Jane, to the fragile thread of life, while Alan sat vigilantly by her bedside, unwilling to leave her side for more than a moment. Yet as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. The events at Springfield Mall had reminded him of a truth he'd tried to push away. Even in the depths of despair, life had a way of nudging forward, demanding resilience. It was late one evening, just a day after the bomb scare at the mall. Alan sat slumped in the chair beside Jane's bed, his hand gently resting on hers. Zeus, ever the loyal companion, lay curled at his feet. The German shepherd seemed to sense every nuance of Alan's emotions, offering silent comfort in the way only he could. Alan's eyes were heavy, his body exhausted from the day's physical and emotional toll. Yet as he allowed himself a moment of stillness, a faint movement caught his attention. His heart skipped a beat as he looked down to see Jane's fingers twitching beneath his own. "Jane," Alan whispered, his voice breaking with equal parts hope and disbelief. He leaned closer, watching as her eyelids fluttered, the first sign of life he had seen in weeks. Zeus's head shot up, his ears perked, and his tail began to wag in anticipation. The loyal dog nudged Jane's arm gently with his nose, as if encouraging her to keep fighting. Moments later, her eyes slowly opened, and Alan felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him, tears streaming down his face. "Dad?" Jane's voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough. Alan took her hand in both of his grip firm yet tender. "I'm here, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been here the whole time, and so has Zeus." At the sound of his name, Zeus let out a soft whine, his tail wagging furiously now. Jane managed a faint smile, her fingers reaching out to touch the dog's fur. It was a small gesture, but in that moment it felt monumental. The nurses rushed in, followed closely by Dr. Reynolds, who had been overseeing Jane's care. The medical staff worked quickly, assessing her condition and adjusting her monitors, but all Alan could focus on was the light returning to his daughter's eyes. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Reynolds turned to Alan with a reassuring smile. "She's still weak, but this is a good sign. She's fighting, Alan, just like you said she would." The next few days marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Parker family. Jane's recovery was slow but steady, each small milestone celebrated with quiet joy. Zeus became her constant companion during her physical therapy sessions, pacing beside her wheelchair and later providing support as she took her first shaky steps. The nurses affectionately nicknamed him Jane's furry PT assistant, marveling at the way the dog seemed to intuitively know when she needed encouragement. For Alan, seeing Jane's resilience reignited something within him. Though the ache of losing Helen remained a constant presence, he found strength in the love and determination of his daughter. The memories of Helen, her laughter, her warmth, her unwavering belief in their family became a source of comfort rather than pain. Alan began to share stories of her with Jane during their walks in the hospital garden, keeping Helen's spirit alive in the moments they now cherished together. The community rallied around the Parkers in ways Alan hadn't expected. Fellow officers organized meal trains and offered to drive Jane to therapy sessions when Alan's duties called him away. Springfield Mall's management, moved by the events surrounding the incident, established a scholarship fund in Helen's name for children affected by drunk driving. Even Peter Hensley, now serving his sentence, sent a heartfelt letter expressing his remorse and gratitude for the second chance Alan had given him to reconnect with his own family. As Jane grew stronger, she began to talk about her future in a way that both surprised and inspired Alan. "I want to be like you and Zeus," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch of their home. Her steps were still slightly uneven, but her spirit was unshakable. "I want to help people. Maybe I'll work with K9s too." Alan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You'd be amazing at it," he said, ruffling her hair. "Zeus and I will teach you everything we know." The bond between Jane and Zeus deepened in ways Alan hadn't anticipated. The once purely professional partnership between man and dog had transformed into a lifeline for the entire family. Zeus's presence brought not only comfort but also a sense of normalcy. His steady gaze and wagging tail, a reminder that even in the face of profound loss, there was still joy to be found. A year after the accident, the Parkers found themselves standing at Helen's grave, the cool autumn wind rustling the leaves around them. Jane, now 14, placed a bouquet of Helen's favorite flowers at the base of the headstone. Her voice was steady as she spoke, though tears glistened in her eyes. "Mom would be proud of us," she said softly. "Of all of us." She glanced at Zeus, who sat attentively at her side, his muzzle now tinged with gray. Alan placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes misty. "She would," he agreed. She always believed in Team Parker. Later that evening, as they walked through the park near their home, a daily ritual that had become part of Jane's recovery, Alan reflected on how far they had come. The road to healing had been anything but easy, but they had faced it together, bound by love, loyalty, and the unyielding determination to move forward. Zeus trotted ahead, his posture alert and confident, as if leading them toward a brighter future. "Dad," Jane said, breaking the comfortable silence, "do you think Mom knew Zeus would take care of us like this?" Alan smiled, his heart swelling with a bittersweet mix of emotions. "Your mom always believed that guardian angels came in unexpected forms," he replied. "And she was right. Zeus has been our guardian angel all along." As they walked into the fading light of the day, the Parker family, Alan, Jane, and Zeus, embodied a story of resilience and hope. Together, they proved that love, even in the face of loss, could heal and transform, guiding them toward a future filled with possibility. A year had passed since the day that shattered the Parker family's world, and though the pain of their loss would never fully fade, life had begun to take on a new rhythm. Alan, Jane, and Zeus had learned to navigate their grief together, transforming it into a source of strength and connection. Each day was a step forward, a testament to their resilience and the enduring power of love. Alan often marveled at Jane's transformation. Once the shy and carefree girl who idolized her parents, she had grown into a young woman defined by quiet strength and determination. Her recovery had been grueling, requiring months of physical therapy, but she had tackled every challenge with a spirit that left her doctors in awe. Zeus had been her constant companion throughout, pacing beside her during therapy sessions, offering support with his presence alone. For Jane, Zeus wasn't just her protector, He was her inspiration. One crisp autumn morning, the family found themselves at a familiar place, Helen's grave. The headstone, etched with her name and the phrase, "Forever in our hearts," was surrounded by fresh flowers, lovingly placed there by Jane. At 14, she stood tall, a slight limp the only remaining sign of the accident that had changed their lives. She knelt down, gently brushing away a stray leaf from the stone. "Mom," she said softly, her voice carrying both sadness and strength, "I think you'd be proud of us. Dad, Zeus, and me, we're doing okay. You always said we were strong together, and you were right." Alan stood a step behind her, his hand resting on Zeus's head. The dog sat at attention, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Alan swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to speak. "She always believed in us," he said, his voice low but steady. "And I think in some way she's still here, guiding us, pushing us forward." The days following Helen's loss had been some of the darkest Alan had ever known. For weeks, he had wrestled with guilt and grief, questioning every decision he had made. But through it all, Jane had been his anchor. Her determination to recover, to honor her mother's memory, had reminded him that he couldn't give up, not on her, and not on himself. And then there was Zeus, the loyal companion who had been there every step of the way, silently offering his unwavering support. As they walked back to the car, Jane turned to Alan with a smile that reminded him so much of Helen, it made his chest tighten. "Dad," she began, hesitating slightly, "I've been thinking, I want to do what you do. Work with K9s. Help people the way you and Zeus do." Alan stopped, his brow furrowing in surprise. "You mean join the police force?" he asked. Jane nodded, her confidence growing. "Yeah, I want to make a difference, to be there for people when they need it most, just like you've always been." Alan felt a swell of pride mixed with a pang of worry. The thought of Jane following in his footsteps filled him with both admiration and concern. But he also knew that her desire came from a place of genuine compassion and strength. "If that's what you want," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder, "then I'll support you every step of the way. And I know Zeus will too." In the months that followed, their lives slowly rebuilt themselves around new routines and new dreams. Jane threw herself into her studies, learning everything she could about K9 training and law enforcement. Alan, for his part, found himself rediscovering his sense of purpose. Though the scars of his loss remained, he began to see his work as more than just a job. It was a way to honor Helen's memory and the values she had instilled in their family. The community, too, played a significant role in their healing. The scholarship fund established in Helen's name continued to support children affected by drunk driving, a legacy that Alan knew Helen would have been proud of. Even Peter Hensley, from his prison cell, wrote letters to Alan and Jane, expressing his remorse and gratitude for the chance to reconnect with his own family. Alan, who had once harbored anger toward the man, found himself forgiving him, understanding that redemption was a path they all needed to walk. As the seasons turned, Alan began to see their story as more than one of loss. It was one of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable bond of family. Helen's absence would always be felt, but her presence lived on in their memories and in the love they shared. Jane's determination to honor her mother's legacy by helping others became a source of inspiration for Alan, reminding him that even in the darkest of times, love could guide them forward. One evening, as they walked through the park, Alan watched Jane laugh as she practiced K9 commands with Zeus. The dog, now graying slightly around his muzzle, responded with the same precision and enthusiasm he always had. Alan couldn't help but smile, a sense of peace settling over him. He remembered something Helen had once said: "Love doesn't disappear, it transforms. It finds new ways to reach us." In that moment, Alan realized the truth of her words. Love had transformed their family. It had given them the strength to heal, to forgive, and to move forward. It was in the laughter of his daughter, the loyalty of his partner, and the memories of his wife. Together, they were living proof that even in the face of unimaginable loss, love could light the way to a brighter future. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.